Alright, in this episode, I'm going to be examining Count Dooku and his role in the prequel trilogy, and I'm going to be taking a pretty unpopular stance because, for the most part, fans really responded pretty well to Christopher Lee and how he portrayed Dooku, and especially now with him dead, there's a lot of kind of revisionist takes on Dooku, how he's one of the best characters, one of the best villains, and that Lee's performance is sort of like one of the top of in terms of Star Wars actors. Now, I actually agree with almost half of this. I do think the performance by Lee is pretty amazing and incredible, and he is using a lot of his skills as a duelist, as a linguist, and as this kind of diplomat and this kind of very cultured person within the Dooku role. But I think when we look at actually Dooku per se more precisely, there's a lot of issues and questions I think we all have that weren't really resolved in either Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. So the good side, I think, is pretty obvious, and I'm just going to go through the list. One is that he's more Dark Jedi than Sith, and that's a really interesting tweak on the Force mythology and forces us to make these more interesting qualifications in terms of how the powers work, in terms of what the dark side is, and all those things. And his saber sort of matches that. It's a red saber, and his own powers are sort of dark side powers, but he's not fully Sith. He's not mutated, he doesn't have a distorted face, and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting tweaking of the mythology. On top of this, George Lucas is doing some really clever things by alluding to Christopher Lee's other roles as Dracula in these monster movies, the Hammer films of decades ago. So if you look really closely, he looks like Dracula and a vampire. And of course, the Sith mythology sort of plays into that in that they try to take life. They're sort of like parasites and things like that. So there's a lot of literally very clever allusions to Christopher Lee as an actor and performer. And of course, that there's just some interesting things about Dooku and the way that Christopher Lee plays him, especially in the dueling, and sort of like the duels are more like dances. They're not really like these one-on-one battles. And that's a very interesting change from the Darth Maul fight, which was much more visceral and much more kinetic, but didn't have the same kind of grace. And then finally, there's a great way that Dooku acts as a metaphor for Anakin, because he really is basically Darth Vader, but without the suit. This is what Vader is going to become, this kind of like old corrupt figure who is very powerful, but basically alone. And so the good aspects of the character I think are very well done in the way Lee portrays it, but then when we get to the bad aspects, I think that they're much more severe than I think people want to believe. And so in that respect, I'm a little bit unclear why he's so highly rated. Now, the first point is not really per se a problem with Lee or Dooku, but the way that the plot was constructed in Attack of the Clones and not really resolved in Revenge of the Sith. We just have some basic questions of how the clone conspiracy works, how are the Caminos being manipulated, how is Tyrannus working with Django, what was the plan, why do they want Padme dead, I mean, was it to lure in Anakin? There's just a lot of mysteries in terms of like how things happened, the missing planet issue in the Jedi Temple. And you're sort of like, well, wait, how did this happen? When did it happen? And those are questions you really don't want when you're watching a film. They should be fully answered in the script. And there's still a lot of loose ends that even by the time of Revenge of the Sith, we're still not clear. Wait, how did this happen? When did you become allies? We know Dooku's basic point. He's upset at the corruption. But how did he even know the Sith are there? If we just look at the films, there's a lot of confusions. The second point is, I think, a little bit more make or break depending on the person, which is that the fight scenes to me ruined a lot of things with both Obi-Wan and Yoda. I know a lot of people actually like the fight scenes with Dooku and the other Jedi at the end of Attack of the Clones, but for me, as well as the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, they didn't really make a lot of sense logically or conceptually with the powers of all these different Jedi. Right, Anakin has a higher metachlorine count than Yoda, but is taken out in 2 seconds. Obi lasts a little bit longer, but again, it seems Dooku is a much better fighter, so why is he even able to put up a fight? And then when he fights Yoda, Yoda's able to block him. They have to fight with sabers, but why doesn't Yoda just use some lightning force powers himself? I mean, it's sort of forbidden for Jedi to do it, but they have done it in the past, and given the emergency, it just seems the whole way that they're attacking one another is for the camera. It doesn't make sense in terms of the story, and for me, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, those are technically not issues that Dooku himself are to blame for, and you can sort of recuperate the character. But probably the most major issue is how his own motivations are never fully explained. He does give us a lot in terms of his reaction to the council, the way that they're different, the corruption of the Republic. But as that great scene with Obi-Wan kind of reveals, it seems like he's really going to betray Sidious, and he's just playing along. He doesn't really believe in Sidious either. He's just using the conspiracy and tries to want to be the hero of the Republic by basically destroying it and then rebuilding it. The problem is we have to infer all these motives. And yes, of course, there's now a lot of EU material that gives us a lot more detail. But if we just look at the films, his goal is either insanely risky or really bizarre and mysterious. And we're just never given a full clarification on what Dooku is up to with Sidious. So I think, again, it's one of the cases where the character is portrayed with a lot of skill and amazing gusto by Lee, but I think people are bleeding over their liking or devotion to Lee into the character. So Lee does a great job, but character as Dooku as a character sort of remains a big question mark, and not a good question mark. It's sort of like, we still don't really know what's going on with the character. Alright, this has been analyzing the Dooku mysteries in the prequel trilogy. Star Wars Analyzed. If you like the content, please hit the like button and or subscribe. Star Wars Analyzed, please be safe. Thank you for listening.